we'll make a start. I'm sure people will jump on as they get freed up from other meetings and things. So welcome to everyone this morning joining us for a webinar on an interesting topic around hangovers in the workplace. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Laura Jarvis. I'm the Senior Manager for an organisation called Generis, and we are a company who support and provide training to people around drug and alcohol use within the workplace. We're part of a much larger charity, which some people may have heard of, at the Alcohol and Drug Service. We've been around for, I think, just over 35 years now. We provide specialist drug and alcohol services in a number of different areas across the Yorkshire and Humber region. So my particular department's been set up now for just over a year, going out specifically and helping and supporting people as they're finding not even so much issues with drug and alcohol within the workplace, but wanting, I think, some specialist advice around their policies, around their procedures, and just how they can really be on the front foot really with an issue that I think has always been around, but I think even more so now people are thinking about some of the impact, particularly that this year's had on people and their drug and alcohol use, which is some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. I hope that you'll find it useful. We're going to look a little bit around what the issue is, the extent of hangovers in the workplace. Some of the stats you may find surprising, some of you may not, but actually really what the impact of that is on companies, and that can be any company ranging from, you know, so we do a lot of work with safety critical companies, but equally some of the issues that people are finding with more office-based roles, and how hangovers, intoxication, anything like that can have an impact on a business and on an individual. We're really chuffed this morning to be joined as well by Nic Johnson, who's here as a panellist. He's going to talk to us a little bit later on about some of his own experiences with alcohol. Nic is a business owner of a company called It's Easy that are based in Hull, and he's going to talk to us about an issue that I know he feels really passionately about and share some of his experience with that. So we're going to just kick off then with a PowerPoint presentation, a really, really simple presentation. I don't want to bore you all with tons and tons of slides. Let me just go to the beginning. There we go. Beginning again. Apologies, IT's never been my strong suit. Right, lovely. There we go. So we're going to look at hangovers in the workplace. I hope it is an interesting topic because I think people can think about it on a personal level. They can think about it in terms of their friends, their family. I'm sure we all know somebody who at some point in their life, in their career, has had a bit too much alcohol the night before and gone into work. But actually, what is the issue? I was surprised by these stats. I think on the one hand, but perhaps not on the other. So as many as 89,000 people turn up to work hungover or under the influence of alcohol every day in the UK, which actually costs the economy up to 1.4 billion a year. We'll come on to a bit later on why it's costing the economy that amount of money. But this is really recent research that was done by the Institute of Alcohol Studies. They actually did a survey on 3,400 British workers. I think with studies, there's more of a tendency for people to underreport rather than overreport. So my feeling on this is that probably these stats are probably perhaps even higher than what's been reported here. But 42% of people admitted to going into work either hungover or intoxicated ever during their career, and 9% of people said they'd done so during the last 6 months. Interestingly, when they break that down and look at where it's most common, it was most common in the hospitality and leisure sector, where 52% had ever done so, but rates were also really quite high in retail and construction, workplaces, which is obviously in construction, is I guess one that you may find more concerning when you've got people potentially working in safety critical work. Your higher earners were much more likely to go to work hungover or under the influence. So only 29% of people earning under £10,000 a year had done so, compared to a whopping 55% of people earning over £60,000 reported turning up to work hungover. When we start to think about the impact of COVID this year and what's happened during 2020, there's been lots and lots of research done around people's alcohol consumption during lockdown. I sort of felt early on that alcohol use would massively increase, and the stats have completely backed that up. So 1 in 5 people reported drinking more frequently during lockdown. 21%, again, I think that is perhaps underreported, but 8.6 million UK adults are drinking much more frequently. And I think when we start to unpick that, there's so many reasons for that. Some of you may have personal experience of that. You may have thought about why that might be. I think fundamentally people have obviously been isolated from their families and friends during lockdown, and have maybe perhaps really struggled with that. But when you think about the stress and the worry that's been caused by people being furloughed, by people having kind of financial worries and about their own job security, you know, we've had a really stressful year, and I think it's caused a lot of stress and worry for a lot of people and a lot of families, and I think that's directly linked to people drinking more during that period. I put in here about people being at home with their children, which is one that, you know, on a personal level, I spent, I think, 5 months of lockdown trying to work from home alongside my partner working from home with 2 small children in the house, trying to homeschool, trying to juggle childcare alongside both of us trying to work, and that was incredibly stressful. I have to say it's probably one of the most stressful 5 months of my life, not having that option to send children to school and to childcare. I think that had a really big impact. I think there's other things. The glorious weather that we had during May will have meant that people were out in the gardens more, drinking more. And actually, when you think about people's working days, people that were previously commuting, going to the office, and spending perhaps that hour at the end of the day sat in traffic coming home, they found that they could log off and be out in their back gardens, drinking a bottle of wine at perhaps 5:05, when normally they would never have been able to do that. Equally, at the other end of the day, people were not having to get up as early, so could therefore perhaps indulge a little bit more on an evening and not be worried about having to be up super early and potentially driving early. So I think that all those things, and I'm sure many, many more for a lot of people, has massively increased alcohol for people. I think one of the worries now as we've come out of lockdown and people are coming off furlough, people are returning to work, returning to offices, the worry for a lot of companies is how they might manage that, how they might offer support, how they might pick up on that as people are coming back to work, and the impact that some of that's going to have on people being able to do their job, I guess, in the way that they should be doing. It's a real significant concern for a lot of people. So they're the stats. I'm sure there's lots of other things online, and I know there's a lot of things in the media, in the news at the moment around alcohol, particularly, and the impact that that's going to have. But when we think about hangovers particularly, I think sometimes they can be brushed off. It can be seen as, you know, I'm not intoxicated, I would blow under a breathalyzer, you know, I've had however much, you know, 6 hours sleep, whatever it might be. But actually it does have a massive impact on people's ability to do their job, and how they present within a workplace. What we know is that when we think about people's cognitive processes, so their ability to be able to think clearly, to be able to do their job and the demands of their job, we know that those levels decline at much lower levels than those that are permitted for driving. So yes, you may blow fine on a breathalyzer, but actually if you're significantly hungover, the chances of you being able to cognitively function properly within your job, it will be significantly impacted. There's lots of other things. So just purely being intoxicated within the workplace, I think people underestimate that. They think because they've had a bit of sleep and that they've had a coffee perhaps before they've started work, or they've gone into the office or the workplace, that they're okay. But actually what we're seeing is that people are presenting at work still intoxicated. What we know about hangovers and that cognitive process is that people make poor decisions, people make mistakes, make errors, and the tendency to cover those mistakes up and not admit to them is much higher with people who are hungover, because they know they're hungover, they know that they've done it, they know that it's probably as a result of staying up too late and drinking too much, so they cover that up, which, you know, obviously in a lot of situations can be quite catastrophic. There's impaired performance generally in all forms, so whether it's a manual role, whether it's a physical role, or whether it's an office-based role. We work with a lot of companies who have people in roles that are critical for their business, so roles like finance, HR, and yes, they may not be out on a building site operating heavy machinery, but they are keeping that business running. They do have a responsibility in keeping the finances correct and right, and a simple mistake in a role like that can really cost business, and that can be as a result of you know, being hungover or being intoxicated. And then when we think about the cost of the economy, it links directly with this next one. So poor performance or low performance that can be caused. Avoidance of tasks is a really big one for people coming in, clocking in. If they're still working from home, they're physically there, sat at their desk, but actually they're doing the very bare minimum they can get away with. They're responding to a few emails, but actually really not tackling that to-do list, not performing in the way that they would be if they weren't hungover. And then on the other side of that, we have much higher levels of sickness, people phoning in sick because they're hungover, and poor timekeeping, so people perhaps not arriving at the time they should do if they're in an office. But I think we've seen that more and more as people have been working from home. So people perhaps are being paid to do a role that's 9 to 5, but actually doing the bare minimum, so attending the meetings they need to attend, but perhaps clocking off much earlier because they're not in the office, it's not seen, so they can finish much earlier, they can perhaps start much later, and that kind of thing. And obviously, I guess the one that springs to mind and is a significant concern for a lot of the people that we help and support is the concern of driving. That might be driving as part of your job, but equally it might be driving to and from work, particularly if people are, you know, starting early on a morning, getting up, and they're taking that chance, that they're taking that risk that perhaps the alcohol's left their system, but it hasn't, and that's a risk to them as an individual. Okay, so I'm gonna pause the presentation there, and we're going to get on to what I think is probably the most interesting bit, which is talking to Nic about his experience with some of this stuff. And thank you, Nic, firstly, for agreeing to do this morning, and I hope it really illustrates and brings this subject to life, really. So I wanted to, I guess, start really at the beginning and talk to you about when you first sort of realised that alcohol was a problem for you and how that sort of came about.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, it is a really interesting subject, and if I'm honest, you know, I didn't really think about how much I was drinking until I saw a Panorama documentary on alcohol units. When I realised how many units I was drinking a week versus the recommended weekly limits, it was a real eye-opener. I realised I'd probably been drinking at a high level for years, and I thought it was normal, and I think in business circles, it's definitely considered normal. And sometimes, I think, as you alluded to earlier, the higher up you get in terms of people within the business, it just becomes an accepted thing that people just drink and drink to excess. If you think about it, you'd sort of like, you'd finish work, you'd maybe have a couple of beers or a couple of G&Ts, followed by 3 large glasses of wine. Well, let's face it, that's a bottle gone right. And all of a sudden, you're looking at your weekly limit in alcohol units right there in one night. And if you're doing that every night of the week, plus weekends, you're looking at about 100 units a week versus the recommended 14 unit limit. So it's no surprise that, it does impact in terms of people in work.
But I think that's really common, isn't it? I think it's so normalised. I mean, alcohol as a subject is normalised within society. And I think you're right. I think we're almost actively encouraged, aren't we? I think you're right, the higher up you get, you're actively encouraged to drink with people after work, to socialise, to network, to do all that stuff, to build up your business.
A part of everything. You're quite right. Even going back 20 years working in marketing and advertising, it was more or less encouraged that you needed to drink to wind down, you needed to drink to get rid of the stress of the day, and that was what everybody did, just to switch off. And it just becomes dangerous as it becomes more and more, and you do get more into it.
Yeah. How do you think that impacted on you then at work? Do you think people knew you were drinking at those levels? Did you hide it?
It's a good question. It definitely did impact on me at work. It took me much longer to get my head together in the morning to focus on work. It meant that, things start to slide, tasks that I should have been able to complete easily took longer, and that ultimately did impact on workflow and profitability. And let's be honest, I was probably more irritable and quicker to snap as well. I think you're right. I don't think people did notice it, or if they did, nobody said anything, because it was the norm. Going back to what we were saying, it's if it's considered to be the norm and it's not something that's off limits, then it's it's just got a hangover, just had a heavy night, just feeling a bit. We justify it really easily. And I think it's quite easy then to brush it aside and just laugh it off, rather than realise what the impact might be on a business.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, we'll come on to kind of how you kind of came out of the other side of that, but I guess while you're in it, and whilst it's socially acceptable, and it's all, I mean, and I've experienced that, not particularly in the role I'm in now, but just from friends I know, it's almost a laugh and a joke, isn't it, around what you did the night before, and brushed off as, oh, well, he's just, he's a bit rough from how much you drunk last night. And I think that makes it much harder for people to recognise when it becomes an issue, and perhaps come forward and say, do you know what, I think this is having a really big impact on me, both at work and at home.
You're right, and I think it's that talking about it that is an issue, and it's hard. It's hard to admit to yourself that maybe that the levels that you're drinking at aren't acceptable, because as we've said, it's easily masked with, well, if everybody else is doing it, if all my friends are doing it, if all my other business colleagues are doing it, then that's not me. I've not got a problem with alcohol. I'm just drinking at normal levels compared to what I think it should be. So, when you do look at it in depth, and when you do actually add up what you're drinking, and you can see that it's way more than you should be, being able to admit that to yourself, and to be able to say, well, do you know what, maybe I do need to address this. It's hard. And I understand why a lot of people just brush it to one side, because nobody wants to stand out, and nobody wants to be the odd one out when it comes to stuff like this.
What, I mean, in terms of, I guess your role at the time was that you were, the owner of this business, and you were in a managerial role. So perhaps, I guess when you think about the support that's offered to people in that situation, how important do you think that is?
I think it's really important. As we've mentioned, there's that stigma when it comes to drinking, and if someone has a problem, or they mention that they may be drinking too much, everybody instantly assumes that they're necking vodka at 8 a.m. and suffering from shakes. But as we've said, there's a whole generation of professional business people, and just people in general who are just drinking to excess without realizing it. It's just so prevalent among, many of my clients and colleagues. And there's that attitude that comes with, people thinking that if you do say that you're not participating, then you're a killjoy or you're boring, and attitudes like that maybe need to be addressed for there to be a change in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of kind of, I guess you watched this documentary, you sort of acknowledged that you had that kind of moment of, goodness, I'm drinking way in excess of what I should be. Could you see, had that not happened, how it could have escalated for you?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
I think I would just have carried on as I was. And if I look back on it accurately now, I can see that, year upon year, it was just getting more and more, and just increasing all the time. So, what would have been a stop work at 6 and have a drink had become a stop work at 5:30 and have a drink, and then stop work at 5 and have a drink. And then every day you're anticipating, that sort of like, oh, can I just finish this task, and then I can have a beer, and then I can relax, and then I can switch off. And you know what it's like. The more you get used to drinking, the more you need to be able to hit that switch off point. So it does slowly creep over time, and I think it's that creep that none of us realise. And it's not until years down the line you look at it and think, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And if I hadn't had that moment of clarity, I think I would have been another sort of 5-10 years down the line, and I don't like to think about what the consequences might have been that on my health or anything else. So yeah.
But that picture of that person who was drinking at a lower level, getting in from work, having a glass of wine, the amount of people that we see coming through the doors of our specialist services, a year down the line, and they can't for the life of them work out how it happened. Really, it started off with a glass of wine because they've had a stressful day. The glass turns to a bottle, and we've seen people from all professions. Some of them you wouldn't believe sat coming through the door needing specialist intervention because they found they're drinking 3 bottles of wine on an evening, and looking at that, they've actually reached some level of dependence with alcohol, and it's it's upsetting to see, really. But I think easily done, isn't it, when you think about, I guess, what you've experienced? And
it is easily done, and it's that creep again that it does just creep up on you. And I think it doesn't help that it's very much normalized, not just in everyday culture, but you go on social media and there's all these memes about mummy needs wine, and mummy sort of mummy petrol, mummy fuel about gin o'clock, and all that sort of thing. And it just becomes the accepted thing that you need to drink, or you need to drink to fit in, or you need to drink to be normal, or if there's a problem you drink to shut it out. And there's certainly been a creep in that, and when it's normalized to that extent, it's easy to see why it happens so much.
Do you think that we've talked about some of the stats during lockdown, but it's something I've thought about a lot, about the impact that it will have had on people. Can you see that? Do you think that there'll be an increase in
very much so. You were saying earlier about when you're working from home that it's very easy just to you haven't got that commute, you don't have that that time when maybe you would have sort of switched off from your work, and by the time you got home you'd be in a calmer sort of mood. If you're working from home, it's very easy just to say, sod this, I'm going to go to the fridge and get a beer or a glass of wine or a gin or whatever it is. And once you start doing that, it just becomes, a treat to look forward to, or you justify it as a treat. And so, you start to do it, from once every other day to every day, to then it becomes, a habit. And it is a habit. It's habit forming. And once you get into that, it's hard to break.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who, obviously it's been such a strange year and such a stressful year for everybody, for so many people, such uncertainty, and so I think anxiety provoking for a lot of people. A friend of mine would watch the 5 o'clock Boris Johnson thing with a glass of wine. That was her, and that would start her evening off. Normally she'd been sat in traffic for an hour and a half. Coming home from work, and so might have had a glass of wine, but it would have been at 8 o'clock, when she'd got in and eaten dinner. But so that you can easily see how people have slipped into those new habits. But I guess the worrying thing is how employers can pick up on any of that, because you might join a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting with your supervisor, or you might join a couple of meetings a week with people, but we're not having that contact, are we, with people in the same way? We're not walking, we're not coming to the office every day, bumping into people, chatting in the kitchen. So it's how people can't pick up on that in the same way.
It's hard to it's hard to pick up on, and when you do realize that maybe you are drinking more than you realize, it's very easy to mask and to hide and to sort of brush it to one side and pretend it's not happening. So it's a difficult job, I think, that employers have, or businesses, in terms of identifying and offering support and help. So with a service like yourselves, I can understand that there's a lot of education required in order to to help people see what's happening and to get people to come forward, because as we've mentioned, there is a stigma to saying I have a problem or I think I'm drinking too much. And again, as we've mentioned, nobody wants to be seen to be that person, the boring one, the one who doesn't now drink. Getting across or getting past those sorts of elements are something that people need to tackle, businesses need to tackle.
It's a double whammy though, isn't it? Because you get that at work and personally as well. There's both, isn't there? Whether it's with work colleagues, or whether it's you're with your friends in the pub or whatever. If you're the one that's saying, do you know what, I don't want that extra pint, I'm going to go home, or I'm not drinking at all, there's a real taboo around that, isn't there? And
massively
stick that would come with that. I think you're right. I think workplaces, employers have an issue with knowing how to tackle the issue, and almost a fear and an anxiety around perhaps opening up that conversation and starting to ask those questions. They might pick up on bits around people's performance, and they might hear things from other people that get reported, that I'm worried, or I smell alcohol on someone, for example. But people have a real fear around having a conversation with someone around that, for fear that they won't know what to do, or they won't know what to say, or they'll offend them, or all manner of different things. And actually, when you break it down, it's as important a conversation to have with someone as what you would if it was around somebody's mental health, or a bereavement, or a separation, or it all impacts, doesn't it, in the same way. So
100%, except that while bereavement, anxiety, mental health issues, there's a lot of support out there, and people are more aware. For a business, it massively impacts on productivity and profitability. When you've got a lot of people who are maybe not performing at the best, and as you said in your presentation, mistakes are made, mistakes are covered up. It happens so much that, and again, it gets brushed off and hidden. But if that was addressed, and not in a punitive way, in a supportive way, then it would be such a benefit to the business to be able to sort of offer a program or support that would help people work around this, and there's massive benefit to the business in terms of their production and profitability.
Yeah, it's that early support, I think, that's vital, that I think companies quite often will have policies, procedures and processes later on down the line, in terms of quite often linked to HR, what's missing. And what there's recent research that came out a couple of weeks ago that said exactly that, said that it's the early support that companies don't offer, they don't offer that. So what they end up with is an issue that escalates, becomes much bigger, because they didn't do anything early on. People might have known about it, and there's whispers about it, but it's almost a little bit brushed, to the side, left and ignored. And then somebody's, like in your situation, you could see how it could have spiraled and escalated. That's what companies see at the end. Is that it's dealt with in a punitive manner, and dependent on the situation at the time. Sometimes that's there may have to be a HR process, but actually, what if companies could offer people support much earlier, to help that individual so that it doesn't escalate, so that there isn't an incident, an accident, all that stuff. And I think people are starting to see that coming through. I always say we don't need any more people sat in our waiting room. Our services are super busy. We try not to operate kind of waiting times and things, but more and more and more we're seeing more people walking through the door. And actually, for the people that were in employment, what they say is, that if they had got that early support, then perhaps they wouldn't be sat there. They might have dealt with it there and then, reduced their alcohol and kept their job.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% understand where you're coming from there, and early intervention, it really makes sense. But going back to the education and awareness thing, it's there is still that attitude to get over, and I think the more that can be done earlier, the better it would be. I'm guessing that's where services like yourself can offer that sort of support.
Yeah, I guess it's taking the mystery out of it all, and training and helping people to understand kind of alcohol, and I guess some of the companies that we've worked with that have taken an approach of training their entire staff teams, you end up changing a culture because people begin to understand that actually if there is an issue they can get support and it is there and this is how. So people are much less likely to hide it and end up covering up mistakes and all that kind of thing, because they're much more likely to come forward and say, I'm struggling a little bit. I think coming out of lockdown and this year, that's just so crucial, that people have that people are, can come forward and say, I'm struggling with my alcohol. Just finally, Nic, then, in terms of, so I guess your story and what happened with you, how did you kind of come out of the other side of that and you acknowledged that there was an issue? What did you do? How did you change things?
I think first off is, once I'd sort of accepted myself that I had an issue, and sort of like you had that sort of frank conversation in your head, to be honest. It's a bit weird, and there has to be that moment of acceptance. So firstly, I sort of found support through reading a number of books. So I just wanted to get as much information as I could in terms of understanding maybe sort of what I was doing, why I got to this point, what the effects of drinking to that sort of level would be. And then I sort of joined some online groups where you'd sort of find people in a similar situation, find sort of supporting stories. The documentary sort of started me down that path, and I did as much research as I could, and just made the decision that the best course of action for me was to just stop. And I know that's not right for everybody, and it's not always safe for people to do that. For myself, I did that, and it worked out. But I would certainly recommend that if you have come to that decision and you've looked at the research and you've spoken to other people, then it's about finding the best way to help you achieve that goal. And it's like anything in business. It was a goal. If my goal was to write, I don't want to feel like this anymore, I don't want to behave like this, I don't want to act in a certain way, then the goal was to stop drinking. So you put the things in place that help you achieve that, and that's what I do. But 100%, look for whatever help and guidance is out there.
Yeah. Would you say that's been a really positive thing for you then? Can you sort of look back now and think, I'm so pleased that I kind of made those really positive steps?
Yeah, it sounds daft because there is that stigma, as we've alluded to all the way through this, but I just don't care anymore because I feel so much better of having done this. I'm so much more aware, alert. I'm more me. I've got me back rather than being a crap version of me, which I was on alcohol. And why would you want to be that? It's certainly been one of the best things I've done, and I can't say that there's any way that I would, want to revert back to that sort of behaviour again. It's coming up for 1.5 years, and I don't see the benefits in going backwards.
Yeah, and I think we see that more and more, and when I've tried to sort of do similar with friends, family, encourage them to just reduce the drinking. actually, when you're talking to people about the benefits of that, it's massive. You know, people feel health-wise just so much better. But actually, you get out of that cycle, don't you, of kind of feeling rubbish. You're feeling rough. You don't perform to your best. You know you're not performing to your best. You put stuff off. You don't do it. Then you're trapped in that cycle of you finish the day. You feel rubbish about the fact that you didn't do your best. You drink more, and you just go round and round and round.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the only solution to when you're feeling crap was have another drink, and it just becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. And yeah, it's once you can break that, it's really quite liberating. But you know, it is tough. It's not easy for people to do. It's not easy for people to admit that maybe, you know, there's an issue. So, you know, kudos to anybody who does go down that route, and you know, it really is beneficial when you do.
It's really reassuring, and thank you so much for kind of sharing that, for being really open and honest. And I know it's something you feel really, really passionately about, and have spoken about previously. So, you know, total hats off to you for feeling like you want to kind of, I guess, spread that message. Because you're right, I think unless we start to openly talk about it and actually address that this is not just an issue with individuals, but actually there is a culture, both on a personal level and within some workplaces, of it being acceptable, then I don't think we'll ever move forward, will we? And we'll just see more and more people.
No, you're right, and thanks, Laura. Thanks for asking me to speak. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I've just got a couple more slides just to round off the. There we go. Just really our top tips, I guess, in how people can manage this issue, and just a little bit about some of the stuff that we do. So these are just my kind of just a few really basic top tips of how people can manage this issue. So you might have somebody who you have some concerns about, people are coming to you and telling you that they're concerned about somebody. And actually the best course of action is just to tackle the issue as it arises, but do so in a supportive way. So don't leave things. If you're worried about either somebody's performance or the way somebody's presenting, just tackle it, but do it in a supportive manner. Take people's concerns seriously. It might, you know, be told to you in a way that's banter, or, you know, that somebody's drinking, you know, a lot the night before work or whatever, but actually take that seriously and think about some of the consequences for that individual, both in their role at work, but also on a personal level. Do that in a private environment. So don't have a conversation that's, you know, in an open space. Have a chat with somebody in private. But actually offer that support where it's needed. There's lots of things out there, lots of places people can be signposted to if they need that early support. But actually having that conversation with somebody really early on could easily prevent it from escalating and becoming a much bigger issue later on down the line for that person. As I said when I was chatting to Nic, we see people all the time that have come to our door and they've had, you know, jobs that they've loved, families, homes, and by the time they reach us, they've normally lost a lot of that, and that can be really quite sad to see, because the chances of somebody turning things around at that point is much harder. Actually, if we offer that support early, they're much more likely to take those steps in reducing their alcohol. But ultimately, and one of the things that we do as a company is we help people to develop that culture of openness. So that the idea that this is really socially acceptable, actually what we need to do is start developing workplace cultures where it's not acceptable for people to come to work hungover. It's not acceptable for that to have an impact on their ability to do their job, because it's affecting businesses, you know, on a huge level. So that's a lot of what we do is helping people with that. So just a little bit about us. We do lots and lots of different things depending on what companies want, really. We do lots of training, awareness raising, workshops. Some companies choose to roll that out across the whole of their company. Some companies choose to do that to more managers, supervisors, to give them I guess the skills, the competence, the confidence to be able to have these conversations with people and almost take some of that mystery out of it. During lockdown, obviously before lockdown hit, we were out and about a lot doing that, going into businesses and doing that, but we've moved everything online, so we now do all of our training workshops either on Zoom or Teams, dependent on what system people are using, and we've got lots of packages that we can develop and make quite specific to specific companies. We work with all kinds of people. I think we initially we've been working with a lot of safety critical companies particularly, but I think more and more people are coming to us with wanting some help and advice and support for more office-based companies. But we work countrywide. We work with companies that are small, companies that are big, and national. So really, everything's really tailored to what people need. We help people with their policies and procedures around drugs and alcohol. Some companies have policies and procedures, but they just haven't looked at them, reviewed them for such a long time. Some companies have nothing at all, so we help them to develop that and to roll that out and to make sure that's exactly as it should be. But we provide an ongoing service and ongoing support for some companies, problem solving, so they'll come to us and say, we've got this concern, how do you think we should tackle it? You know, what advice can you give us? And we will help people with helping to implement that. So it's all very well training people, but how do we make sure people can continue to use that and to feel confident in having those conversations? Okay, I will send the slides out to everyone who's joined us today. These are the contact details, so there's much more information on what we offer on our website, and these are my email and my phone number. We are offering a package at the moment for a team to jump on and do some training, which is £75. That's like an introductory offer to a package that we've just put together. It's aimed predominantly at kind of line managers, supervisors, HR people, to come and do that sort of half a day's training session, just to give people a little bit more context and information and skills around this subject. So I'm happy for people if you want to contact and ask any questions. If anybody has any, I should have said this at the beginning really, but if anybody has any questions now they want to fire, I'm happy to. We're just at the time, I think we're just at 45 minutes now, so we're just at the time. Don't think anybody's sent anything through, but I'll check. If anybody does have any burning questions for either me or for Nic, we'll try and answer any. So somebody's asked how often do cannabis questions, how often do cannabis issues come up? Cannabis is another really common one that we see all the time. I think similar to alcohol on a social level, really, just everywhere that you go, it crops up all the time. Again, the evidence has shown that cannabis use has increased massively during lockdown. It's one of the only drugs that really has shot right up for obviously some of the same reasons, I think, as alcohol. So the answer is it comes up all the time. It's probably the second one after alcohol that we get questions and queries about, and that we offer people kind of advice and support on managing that from a whole raft of places, safety critical companies in particular that have a concern about it, and office based, because again, similar to alcohol, has a huge impact on that, when we could think about that cognitive impairment on people. Good question. There's nothing else come through. Happy to answer. Appreciate that everybody wants to post questions on a forum like this, so I'm happy to answer anything that anybody wants to ask. Can ping me an email or give me a call, and I'll do my best to answer. But thank you for joining. I hope people have found it useful, and again, thank you to Nic for co-hosting this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye, guys.